and welcome back to this bonus episode of Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero, and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I'm not a licensed therapist, and I cannot believe we are back here.
You cannot believe you are back here, or you cannot believe
all the above. Actually, I lied. I can believe we're back here. But before we get into the episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so that you're alerted anytime we post new content to the channel. So, tell everybody what we're doing here.
I feel like we just switched roles a little bit. You took my lines.
It's been a while. We were on the beach a couple days ago, having a nice vacation from podcasting, thinking we've got, a few more weeks to a few more months before the next episode comes out. Really enjoying some time off. We were down right in the Tulum area. We could have gone and seen where Joey cried for the last time last season. And then news broke.
Yes. So Chris and I are back for this, extra special episode of Reactivity TV to talk about the breakup, the golden breakup of Gary and Teresa. And, while we're not a Bachelor news outlet, we thought it would still be a good opportunity to talk about a relationship and what contributes to a relationship ending, and also to talk about the reactions people are having and why we think that's happening.
So we get an announcement that Gary and Teresa are going to be making a big announcement. And I kid you not when I say that I saw people predicting that the announcement might be a pregnancy.
I did not hear that. That is absolutely wild.
We live in a society that has forgotten everything we know about biology. But Teresa is in fact long past the age where it would be quite an achievement and quite something for the medical journals if that were in fact the case.
But that speaks to, again, indicators of why we're getting some of the reactions that we're getting. Mm-hmm. People were really blindsided. Some people were really blindsided by this announcement. And so you didn't say what the announcement was. Yeah.
So instead, we get a dissolution of a marriage. So what is your initial take on the announcement and the use of word choice here?
Gary be Garying. I got this message in the beginning of a workday from a friend of mine, and I initially saw the text come through before I saw what she was referencing because she sent me a screenshot. So the text was, "I am so shocked and saddened by this news, and I've lost all hope." And
that's a bit extreme.
And so I was like, "Oh my God, what happened? What happened?" And I open my messages and see the screenshot that's like an e-news photo saying that Gary and Teresa are getting a divorce. And it was like an immediate that was fast, but not gutted, it's not surprising to me at all. Despite what we said at the Golden Wedding episode, this didn't come as a huge OMG, I can't believe this kind of reaction from my end. The timing, the quickness of it is what was more surprising to me.
It was certainly, a season where we saw a lot of people come out and a lot of people gain a lot of, inspiration, as well as a lot of insight into dating into your golden years. So I can understand why some people really took it as a gut punch. But let's be honest, this was foreshadowed long in advance.
Yeah.
There were a lot of red flags. We had talked about them, throughout the entire season. Gary and Teresa both seem like wonderful people in many ways, but they are 70 years old, locked in to leadership positions within their families, and they're tied heavily into their families, and they lived a significant distance away from one another. And it didn't seem like Gary was the type that was going to potentially bend as much as one would need him to bend. And so it did feel like Teresa would probably be the one that would have to bend. And,
sources
I think
say it was Teresa that was more rigid. Like, she has a job that she,
sure.
So again, not a news outlet. I'm just going on what I've kind of read and heard, but what they essentially shared with us was they couldn't find a home together.
Sure.
And location and being far away from their families, for both of them, they were going to have to sacrifice and compromise, and it was going to put a toll on those relationships, their own family relationships that they weren't neither of them was willing to make a compromise on.
Mhm.
But what I heard in addition to that was that, Teresa is in a great career in finance and compliance, and she really enjoys her job, and they had explored the idea of living, a couple of months or maybe even a couple of weeks in one of their cities and switching on and off. But that's not I don't think
Conducive to a career.
Teresa has that flexibility within her job, and for her to look for another job at 70, and in who knows what city, whether it was in Charleston or in wherever he lives in Indiana, like probably going to be more challenging in a finance role than in New Jersey where she is living. And so that was another aspect that I heard, was that Teresa's still very fulfilled by her career and wasn't necessarily ready to kind of give that up. I don't know if that's true. That's like probably not a trusted source.
But let's just take that at face value for now, because I think there's a lot of things that we could touch on here and talk about. But let's assume for a second that is the primary reason, and we can get into other reasons later. But I mean, thoughts on that?
On which part, not wanting to be far from family, or the thoughts on career?
Well, you could take them individually or take them collectively, but ultimately we're talking about, an individual. We'll just talk to Teresa for a second here. We're talking about an individual who signed up for a show, kind of knowing the parameters of the show, and ultimately winning the show.
Yeah.
And then kind of after the fact realizing like, oh, this is going to be challenging.
My overall takeaway, my overall synthesis of, I think, what happened for both of them was that you get really caught up in the moment, and you are so removed from reality when you're on a reality TV show, and that it's so easy, so simple to get wrapped up in the fantasy, wrapped up in the emotion. And when we are emotional about things, we lose our greater sense of rationality and logic. And so they're getting a lot of heat for like, hey guys, why didn't you have these conversations before? I imagine they did have these conversations, but in that moment where they feel so immersed in love and their own hope, they're thinking like, this is going to be fine. They weren't properly weighting or estimating the true impact and toll that it would have on their relationships with their family. And so I have to believe, I always have to give kind of the benefit of the doubt that they signed up for this, that they got married, went through that process, put their families through that process, because they just were too emotional to be rational enough to really think this through. I think hope got the better of them.
So what you're describing is a very teenage mentality to the whole thing. The hope, the drive, the looking at the, only the upside, not looking at the downside.
Like two high school seniors deciding to go to college at different schools and remain together. I mean,
or the worst one,
what I will say
two
is,
college seniors or high school seniors deciding to go to the same college.
Oh, gosh.
That's even worse.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, people make it work. Shout out to Catherine, who's one of those people that maintained a high school relationship through colleges and all of that. So like, yeah, it can work. But Gary and Teresa are also, they're in their 70s. They're so established in their lives. And so the idea that they might need to be more flexible and even be a little bit more uncomfortable than they were willing to or ready to is probably like, nah, like I'm good, And I think that also spoke to, I think the interviewer had asked, like, why couldn't you just ride this out a little bit more and almost fake it? And they were like, we're in our 70s. Like, we don't have time for that. And so I think that sense of like, okay, we tried it. It didn't work. Let's move on. Let's like not waste more time. Did you have a reaction to that piece? So
I want to come back to the interview in a little bit specifically, because I have a lot of thoughts on how that was delivered and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, my overall takeaway here is, and better than anybody, and I think probably our audience is starting to pick up on, I'm a relatively practical individual. I like to think things through and only do things that make sense, and are going to be feasible. And I think if I'm Teresa, I'm probably not even applying to the show. And if I'm Gary, I'm basically eliminating anybody that I don't think is going to move, because Gary, I think, is a little bit intractable and has demonstrated a little bit of selfishness. We've talked about it throughout the season.
Okay.
So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think you have to be delusional to sign up for the show and actually think you can win.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's that.
Well, you have to be delusional to sign up for the show and actually think you're going to make it on the show.
Okay, yeah, even fair. And then to win.
Sure, yeah.
So like the odds are not in your favor. Like that's delusional.
And I do think that there's a lot to be said of like was it Sean from BIP just YOLOing it. Like, hey, listen, it's an experience. I'm going to sign up. I'm going to see what happens.
Well,
I'm
that's
going to
kind
take
of like what
experience.
Ellen had said about her wanting to join the show. Like that this is an experience and something that she and Ramona had talked about. And so like, yes, of course she was there to find love, but also for the experience. And so I think that that's such a more, speaking of rational way to approach this. Gary, on the other hand, I think he was deluded enough with his own self-confidence that he thought anybody would have moved for him.
I think that we've seen enough of Gary to suggest that he has a bit of a subtle and not in a vindictive or malicious way, but there is a subtle selfishness to him and how he thinks about the world and his decision making. Certainly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I would say I could see.
I just think that starting with you should have never gone on the show. You know what you signed up for is a poor argument, is what I'll say. I think it's like, as we've talked about in The Bachelor, as we've talked about in Bachelor in Paradise, like, tell me how you were spending your time in those fantasy suites. Tell me about the conversations you were having. But like to extend some empathy here, you and I were recently in a conversation where you were kind of thinking about a decision that could impact our marriage. And I had said to you, like, maybe I'm being naive, but like, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. And we were kind of having a little bit of a debate where I was saying like, I think it's going to be fun.
You were the Teresa and Gary in that conversation,
exactly.
And I had to be reality setting in. Yeah.
Yep. And so I do think it's easy to get that way because what was I like, our relationship's really strong. Like it was a logistical decision that we were kind of trying to make. And so like, I get how you get here.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, without getting to the details, that was an opportunity that I would have loved to have pursued. But the reality is it would have been an opportunity that logistically would have put tremendous strain on the marriage. And it just, too many other things would have to get sacrificed. And so ultimately you have to make a decision, and not pursuing the opportunity was the right thing for us. People like to think about things in the best case scenario. How good is whatever I'm dealing with, whether it's buying a stock or going into a relationship or starting a new job. We like to think about what is the best case scenario, but we never think about what things are at their base case and what things are at the absolute worst case scenario. And you need to weight things accordingly because you're going to be in your base case most of the time, and you're not going to be in equal proportions in your best case or your worst case. And people, will always look to, we see it, at Revive all the time, offer people different opportunities, and they will always they'll always take whatever opportunity, gives them the most whatever in the best case scenario, even if the downside is way more likely and the worst possible scenario. That's what we see all the time. It's a human thing. And yeah, I think that's where, kind of the Gary and Teresa kind of situation here, and not just them, but everybody in these types of scenarios.
Right.
And you have to be practical. You have to really think things through and make considerations with realistic expectations.
Sure.
Right.
And I could imagine, right? Like going through like a 3-month cycle. Again, it's probably one of those things where you don't realize, for example, like how, again, totally pulling this example out of thin air, but like Teresa is out in Indiana, doesn't even realize how often she might be missing something from one of her grandkids, or like whether it's going to a basketball game or something, like how not being kind of down the street or as local, it has an impact. And those are things that you might not completely estimate when you are thinking about like thinking through the decision, or like the little day-to-day things that you might not even realize amount to a great deal.
Yeah, I mean, just think about our situation. My family lives about 2.5 to 3 hours away. Your family lives 2 miles down the road. And
1.25 miles.
1.25 miles. So when you consider the just sheer number of events that we go to for your family versus my family, I mean, there's a huge disparity. Mm-hmm. And it's not just those little events. We only see my family ultimately when it's an actual event for the most part. Mm-hmm. Whereas we'll just randomly run into your family all over town, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's cousins or, uncles or parents. And yeah, it's if you're going to make a decision like that, almost the best possible thing you could do is maybe take I don't know, a good 2-month vacation. If you're at 70, take a 2-month vacation and just write down all the things you missed during those 2 months and then times that by 6 and see if you can mm-hmm. live with that. Mm-hmm. And that's probably one of the best proxies that you can do mm-hmm. in getting, find ways to simulate scenarios in the short term and see how it goes. And think about things like each holiday. Where do I go? What do I do? What are my traditions? Right. How would these things happen?
Yeah, thinking through your life. And I think we might have referenced this on a previous episode of Reactivity TV when the most recent season of Love is Blind is out. But one of my favorite conversations we saw, granted, it was with one of the most unlikable men on the show, was around kind of walk me through the holidays. Mm-hmm. What does Thanksgiving look like? What does, Christmas look like? What do you want it to look like? And whether that's a conversation that you have with your partner, your prospective partner, or whether that's something that you reflect on for yourself and think about what am I willing to give up here? Those are really important things to consider when blending a family. I think that part of what happens when people think about an engagement or marriage is that they're so focused on the romantic, but truly it needs to be a good balance between romantic and practical. And yeah, the practical isn't sexy or exciting, but you need to have both in order to understand if this is actually going to be a sustainable relationship. And that's why I'm, again, erring on the side of, I think they just got too wrapped up in the romantic here and forgot to get practical. And that's my giving them the most immense benefit of the doubt. We can debate, we'll never know, but we can debate whether or not we actually thought they were genuine in their care for one another. We can also, talk about, as you said, there were things in the interview for sure, but I don't know that that's as relevant. We'll never really know their true intentions and what was going on in their mind. So I'm sort of less interested in us talking about that, but more how do people get here? Mm-hmm. Because it's not just Gary and Teresa on, a TV show jump into a marriage and then quickly the marriage dissolves. This happens in real life all the time. Yeah. All the time.
So you said something really important that I want to circle back to, and that is, a marriage is a combination or a marriage between the practical and the romance. I have a slightly different take on this, and that is that the romantic part of it, or the just romance in general, is facilitated by the practical. Mm-hmm. It is extremely difficult to maintain that romantic connection if you haven't worked out. If you're fighting over things like logistics or what holiday you're going to, how many people out there have friends or relatives where every single holiday, they're fighting over which family's getting more time or, where we're going to go. You need to work out these, practical applications of the relationship. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, you've now made room for romance.
I agree with you, and I've heard your perspective on this, and I do
You've
think
lived my experience.
I do think there's a lot of weight to that and a lot of credibility. But I do think for not a long time, but a relationship can sustain itself on just the romance alone.
Oh, sure, yeah,
and that creates
the honeymoon. That's called the honeymoon phase. That is the honeymoon phase.
And the honeymoon phase, just FYI, is actually 2 years. So you don't fully get into a true cycle with someone until you're 2 years in. Just imagine that. And Gary and Teresa only had a total of 6 months, maybe? And their dating period was complete fantasy, right? They weren't pressed to have to see one another, I don't know, decide who was paying for what, decide on anything expense wise. You didn't have the pressures of oh, we're going on a date. My daughter called me for emergency babysitter, those kinds of real life situations that might come up where they actually have to think outside of their relationship.
So let me ask you, you're a single young lady who's dating
If I were a single young
so
lady,
just hypothesizing here, right? And there's a young chap that has caught a glint in your eye. You're got a date night planned, and suddenly your son or daughter calls and has an emergency. That's we'll call it a pseudo emergency, where they need a last minute babysitter. And it's one of those things where no one's dying, no one's going to the hospital, but it'd be nice if you did it. How do you bring up those types of scenarios with somebody that you're dating?
Okay, so
As a hypothetical.
No, I'm glad you brought this up because people ask for these hypotheticals. What would you do if? How do you figure it out? How do you know? And while it would be great if we all had a manual of how exactly to have these conversations, it just doesn't exist. Instead, you have to have a sense of what feels right for you and what feels good to you, and then keep your eyes open for observations, right? Like, because the way that I see you navigate that would either put more confidence in my relationship with you because we align on values, or it's a turnoff and I'm not into it. And I think we're so scared to get hurt or and heartbroken that we like want the answer and we want to like know exactly what to say and how to suss this out through a conversation. Not going to happen. We just need to rely on our own observation and then our ability to act accordingly with the information that we observe. And so I don't have a conversation starter for you. I mean, you could of course ask, what are you looking for? And tell me about your relationship with your family. But you could bullshit all day long with those surface level answers. You're not actions are meaningful. Words are not.
That's the absolute correct answer. You did a nice, elegant, shrinky version of my favorite concept that everybody's sick of hearing me talk about: revealed preference. You can ask all the questions you want in the world, but people will either lie, they will misrepresent whether
they might think they're telling the truth.
And that's the nature of true revealed preference, is that people they don't intentionally lie. They think what they're saying is true, or sometimes there's certain things in society that cause people to want to answer a certain way, certain pressures, but when they're in their bedroom by themselves making a decision, they're going to make a different decision than what they say publicly that they would make. And it's no different in dating. When you're dating, you're putting your best foot forward. You're also thinking in hypothetical land, getting swept up in the romance. And you cannot trust a lot of those statements, not because people are intentionally lying, not because people are intentionally misleading or anything like that. It's simply because, we're all doing the same thing. We're all living in magical Christmas land where things are just going to work out. And the answer usually to most of those questions is reveal preference. You observe what people do and you catalog what they do. And over a period of time, you collect a bunch of data and you assess the character, quality, and values of a person and put them basically over your own and see, do we match? And if we match, if our blots are both right on top of each other, then this could work. And if your blot's over here and my blot's over here, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah. And you have to have enough opportunity to collect that information.
Not always. Sometimes it can be one date.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. But oftentimes it's more nuanced than that.
Sure,
and I think we're, again, too scared of getting hurt and or too impatient to go through that process. People might cut and run at the faintest sign that it might be something because they're so scared of getting hurt, or they are just too impatient to kind of go through the process. So,
yeah, I think that we see often, there's actually a lot of very interesting kind of survey data and polling data over the last 7 or 8 years that show women, especially kind of 20-something young females, their standards have gotten so high that they are basically bailing on relationships. If they get 80% of what they want in a partner, that to them is settling, and many of them are just bailing on those relationships. Meanwhile, men in those same surveys, if they get 60%, they're happy, and at 80%, they think they've hit a home run. So it's just this really interesting dynamic, which I think speaks to a lot of larger societal, situations that are going on. But Yeah, newsflash, everybody. If you get 80% of what you're looking for, lock it down quickly. That's phenomenal. Certainly when we got together, we had very similar core values. But, kind of where we were at and where we were claiming that we were going to be going, we were not 100%. I think we were probably somewhere in the 70s or something like that.
Well, we know from, a lot of different research, most notably by Esther Perel, who's a marriage and family therapist, that it's just impossible that someone is going to get 100%.
And would you want 100%? How boring would that be?
I was just having that conversation earlier today, how boring it would be and how much of a setup it is for disappointment for yourself and for whoever it is you're dating to imagine that they could hit 100%. And we shouldn't look for that. We should have quality relationships outside of our significant other that help us fill to that 100%. Yeah, so 80% is pretty friggin' high.
Yeah. Lock it down, people, if you get 80%. Lock it down.
So
go ahead.
So I know that you referenced the actual interview and you having some thoughts on that. Let's shift over there.
Yeah. So first things first, Gary's use of the term dissolve. Now, I love the term dissolve. So Gary and I have a very similar vocabulary. For those of you who want to go back to swim trunks, still me and Gary, same thing. I love the word dissolve, use it all the time. But it was really just spoke to, and it was a couple of different terms they used. The sanitized way that they spoke of getting a divorce ultimately was, I feel like, in stark contrast to what they were trying to portray, in that they're like holding hands and still touching each other. And, oh, we still love each other. And it was one of those situations where the words coming out of your mouth do not match the body language. It's all incongruent to me. And the language that they chose to use, and just the body language, indicated to me that this was highly PR'd up, highly prepared. And to me, that was off-putting in many ways, because and look, it's your private business. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have even done this. I wouldn't have even done it. I don't care if I was the Bachelor or not. I'd keep it private and move on with my own life. But if you're going to do it, be genuine. And there was no part of this interview that struck me as genuine. Your thoughts?
No, I had the same thought. And I know I said we wouldn't go to their wedding and talk about how honest their intentions were. But for me, it mirrored their wedding, where it seemed very performative, very disingenuous. And so that was the part of all this that it didn't surprise me. It just felt, you criticized Joey of this, a very robotic, not robotic in like the way, the delivery per se, but like the language. It just felt just a little too wrapped in a bow, a little too perfect. Oh, you're best friends? Come on. Like, who are you doing that for? Like, we don't need that. Just tell us the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a big fan of blunt honesty. Whatever is going to be from it is going to be from it, and let the chips fall. But look, on the one hand, I get it. They're probably getting a ton of pressure from the show and from the fans.
And it sounded like they felt pretty kind of guilty in a way.
Yeah, probably. But, ultimately, look,
this was ABC's most successful show in a really long time. He's, America's grandpa. Then he had this blip of like bad PR at the end of the season, right? And then they got married and were kind of like hanging our hats on like this golden marriage, especially ahead of a golden Bachelorette season. So like all of this like new energy for the Bachelor franchise hanging on Gary's and Teresa's head.
Well, I mean, they also backed it up with Joey, who by many accounts is one of the best Bachelors of all time.
Of all time, for sure. Yeah. So hopefully Joey is doing enough. But I think that the guilt kind of shined through. And I think that's why they kind of tiptoed around it all, is they were feeling like, oh, we gave people an opportunity to see that, love could happen later in life. And just because our relationship is ending doesn't mean that's still not true. And we're still looking. Like, it just felt very, very apologetic. And you didn't owe us an apology. You didn't owe it to us.
Although many people in our comment section will probably disagree with that. They were, there's some people who take what's said on this show quite personally.
On this show?
Take what happens in these reality TV shows quite personally, I've discovered.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to hear from you all. Like, how did you feel about this breakup? Was it as shocking to you as it was to some others? Was it surprising? Were you expecting it? Yeah, I don't know. The interview was definitely not
sanitized.
Yeah.
It was not, in my mind, a good foot forward. But again, I don't think we were owed that. And so, yeah, such is life. But so a couple other things I want to touch on. One would be they are now getting divorced. They have made the claim, and let's take them at face value. I do not believe for even half a second that they are going to remain best friends and they're going to talk all the time and discuss their lives with one another. But let's assume for a second that is in fact what they attempt to do. Good, bad? Should they be ripping the Band-Aid off? How is this going to impact their future relationships? How do you navigate this in we'll call it an amicable divorce type situation where there's no kids or businesses or anything like that lingering around, no assets commingled, there's nothing to unwind, so to speak? What are your thoughts?
I think it's typically not a great idea to remain in the lives of an ex if there's no specific reason to, just for closure's sake. So maybe they're telling us they're going to be friends for our sake, but I just can't imagine.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, look, if you have kids,
like a clean break is good.
If you have kids, then you have an obligation to not just remain in each other's lives, but you have an obligation to treat that other person as best as possible because you are modeling relationships for them. There's an individual that I knew. We haven't kept in contact, but he got divorced from his wife. And every single birthday, holiday, whatever, he would bring his ex-wife flowers or whatever, even though he actually could not stand her and basically hated her. And when people would ask him, why do you keep doing this? He would say things like, because I have a son and it's important for me to model how to treat a woman, even though I can't stand my ex and we have no love lost. It is important for me to model how to be a good man and a good father to my son.
Well,
go ahead.
Kids that other parent is 50% of your child too, and so when you reject or treat poorly the other parent, then the child internalizes that a part of them is also bad.
But if you are not in a situation like that, then I agree with you. There's if there is no assets, no relationships or anything like that, I think it's a very clean cut and run, and you probably should. It's fine to maybe linger on for a couple weeks, couple months, but certainly anytime you start to seriously date again, I think I'm a little more sympathetic to it in 70s because, you are at an age where presumably your circle is getting smaller, and you have less people outside of immediate family. Granted, you probably have a larger family. Hopefully you do. But you also have a smaller friend circle or whatever. And so I can understand why you might try more at that age. But I do generally think it's usually better to cut and run. And not try to maintain it. So final takeaways on this entire thing.
Final takeaway. I will still watch another season of The Golden Bachelor.
What about The Golden Bachelorette?
Sure. This has not spoiled the show for me.
Are you rooting for Teresa to be the Golden Bachelorette?
No.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I think she could not carry a season. It would be really awful, actually.
This might sound really petty. I just don't think it would be fair, especially because they had like an amicable breakup. If they had a rough breakup, then fine. We've seen them do that before, aka Becca Kufrin. But no thanks.
Yeah, I don't think that I would really be excited for a Teresa Golden Bachelorette season. I don't think that she's got the strength of personality to really carry a season. She's too nice, I think, too amicable. And I think you just need somebody who's gonna, it just, you could see her struggling really hard to eliminate people, and it would get a little sad. I think it would be less exciting and a little more sad at times. Yeah.
Any main takeaways for you?
Oh, I mean, I think ultimately not shocking. I 100% agree with them not pretending and prolonging. They're in their 70s. I wouldn't do it at 40. I wouldn't prolong it. I don't care who is counting on me, just because, life is short and it doesn't matter if you're 40, 70, or 20. You know, get on with the next part of your life. And I'm glad that they've come to this decision quickly and they're moving on. It's always sad when a marriage falls apart. I say all the time, I'm a big proponent of marriage, but it's not like these two people didn't have great romances in their lives and great marriages. So it's not like these two people didn't already gain the benefits of marriage. Right?
Let me ask you, if one of them were to get married again, would you judge that? Like, how would you view that?
That's an interesting question. I think if they got divorced again, I think that is more worthy of some kind of judgment than getting married again. I think no. I mean, I think that you should always be trying to find the person that makes you want to be a better person and makes you want to make sacrifices and live beyond yourself.
The person that you can't live without.
The person you can't, the person, no, the person that you want to make sacrifices for, the person whose life you want to make better every single day, and the person that you put above yourself every day. You should always be looking for that person, and hopefully we all find it. And, I think that as you get older, the pool gets smaller. And as a result, there is factors related to loneliness and factors related to just, feeling like you kind of have to settle a little bit.
Connection is highly, highly correlated with longevity.
Absolutely. So I think, and again, who am I to judge? I'm not saying I'm judging anybody, but if the question is where's the line between what is acceptable to be judged upon and what is not, I would say somebody who has had a 30 plus year long marriage and then into their golden years gets married 3 times, you know what? I don't think I can judge him, because you know what? At that point, it's probably less about finding the perfect person and more about just having a friend and a companion. And that is valuable. And, and so I'm never going to besmirch a person in that situation. I think if you've been married 3 times and none of these marriages have lasted more than a couple of years and you've been divorced 3 or 4 times, then and you have, you don't have that long base. I think at that point you have to start looking at yourself and what you're doing and the people you're attracting and the people you're attracted to, and asking yourself at that point, what is the disconnect here? Why am I in this pattern? And if you're going to make a judgment, that would be the time where I think a judgment is warranted. And I think judgment is even the wrong word. It's a reflection on what has gone on to lead you to this point. Once is a mistake, twice is a pattern, right? And, usually, we've made choices that lead us down most of wherever we end up.
We're the common denominator in our life.
Thank you. Yes. At the end of the day, yes, bad things happen to all of us, and some people, worse things have happened. And there are situations where, we really, something was completely out of our control, especially when you're a child and all this stuff like that. But when the same sort of thing happens 2 or 3 or 4 times, eventually the statistics are not in your favor. At some point, you have to start looking at yourself and asking, what is it that I have done, or what decisions have I made, or what am I not considering, or what am I overlooking to lead me into this situation over and over and over again? And I think that's really important. I think self-reflection is hard. It's really hard. But I think the most successful people in society tend to be people that at least have some general competence around self-reflection.
I totally agree. Catherine and I talk about self-reflection all the time as basically like the main tool to harness overall well-being. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Want to get out of here?
Yes.
I got something before we do, though. We are talking about the Golden Bachelor. And we also are going to be having the Golden Bachelorette coming up here in a couple of months.
And the regular Bachelor.
No, but I'm only talking Golden.
Okay.
We only care about Golden for this announcement. So if you happen to be in the Southern Connecticut area on Thursday nights, is it?
I think so.
Thursday nights, Revive has sponsored a senior ladies bocce team. So Revive,
our own Golden Girls.
Our old Golden Girls. We got our four golden bocce players. They'll be playing Thursday night. So if you happen to be down in the Southern Connecticut area, you like some bocce, and you want to go and support the Revive team, I'll put a link to the league in the show notes. Yeah.
Yes.
Did you hear about their new ringer all-star player? Her name's Pam, I believe it is. I hear she's unbelievable player.
She also is she moonlights as a Golden Bachelor commentator
and an interior decorator as well.
Shout out to my mom. Yes, so that's coming up at Revive, as well as a bunch of other things. You can stay up to date with everything going on at Revive on our Instagram page at ReviveCFW. Reactivity TV also has an Instagram account. You can follow us there at Reactivity TV. We have another podcast I've been alluding to all episode and all season called Wishing You Well, where my co-host, Catherine, who's also a therapist, help us navigate wellness and talk to people about their wellness journeys. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, also on our YouTube page. And we will be back. We'll definitely be back for Jen's season of The Bachelor. And we'll be back here and there between now and then with some other content around TV, movies, reality TV.
I figure Joey and Kelsey should be breaking up here in a minute
No,
now.
don't say it. I'm rooting for them.
I've got 3 seasons under my belt right now, and so far
we
are 4 for 5 in breakups. So we only got Kelsey and Joey left to go.
Fingers crossed. Don't put it out there. Anyway, we will be back. As always, don't hesitate to drop any suggestions in the comments of this episode. You can also email us at reactivitytv@revivecfw.com. Thank you so much for being here, for being a viewer, for being a subscriber. We appreciate you. We're happy to be back just for this one quick episode, but we will be back so soon for more, and we can't wait to see you then. Bye.
Can we go back on vacation now?
Yes, please.
See ya.